Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. With Mercedes results trending in a positive direction for the team, they give a lot of credit to actually deciding to follow Lewis Hamilton's development direction ideas he gave to the team last autumn. They originally declined to do so. Hamilton was not happy about it at the start of the season. They've now followed that path more closely and it is heeding results. Mercedes engineers also seem to believe Verstappen isn't hiding much pace and they're getting very close indeed to being able to match the Red Bull on certain circuits. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, some drama of the day. Just wanted to mention this. You guys have probably seen this floating around. So Vampire Diaries actress Claire Holt, she's been in various things over the years. Now she's actually quite well associated with Formula 1 and we'll see that in a second, which is why this is more of a big deal. So she gets asked here on Instagram, do you still watch F1? And she says, I love it, but I'm tired of Max winning all the time. Also, I think he's a grouchy baby. I'd like Checo to beat him, which is, you know, who cares at the end of the day, right? Celebrity thinks this, celebrity thinks that. Max, I'm sure, doesn't care about these comments. Grouchy is kind of like irritable, bad-tempered, whatever. And she must be relatively new to Formula 1 if she's not used to drivers dominating for a period of time. But I'm still quite the statement. I know that people think, well, who cares, right? I know she's been, you know, people have been going into her Instagram comments and chatting all this bollocks, but you know how it goes. On the internet, right, people go pretty crazy. But it is interesting that she, I think, considers herself some sort of like de facto Williams ambassador. She's quite often in the paddock with Williams and in their cars, and there's been some debate as to whether if you're super associated with a certain Formula 1 team, should you be having, should be letting opinions like that be known publicly? I don't know. I don't really care, to be honest, but it was a bit of drama of the day, so I thought I'd mention it at the very least. Speaking of Red Bull though, Helmut Marko says that Ferrari was actually the fastest team at the Canadian Grand Prix. He probably means Ferrari fastest team but Red Bull, and by the numbers that's not necessarily true. I mean, they were roughly 0.4 of a second off the pace of Verstappen, but you then have to consider they did one stop that race, so their tyres definitely weren't optimal. But then again, towards the end of the Grand Prix, Hamilton came out at a not too dissimilar time to the Ferraris, and they couldn't really close any ground in on Hamilton. I think Leclerc finished the race roughly 4 seconds behind Hamilton, so definitely respectable from Ferrari. And had they started further up, and they'd have actually done the good strategy they did, can you believe it, they would have been challenging most certainly for the podium, and to be fair, they almost were. So very interesting to hear that Helmut Marko from Red Bull says that actually the Ferrari was the closest competitor in race pace to the Red Bull that weekend, and they were quite lucky Ferrari started further back. And Ferrari was pretty good there last year, but it does seem like they understand their car a little bit more. It's tricky with Ferrari because they seem to flip-flop a bit between good and bad weekends. So we'll see in Austria, but in fairness, last year in Austria they won, which was the final race they've won in Formula 1, right? Because since then it's just been Red Bull and Mercedes that one time in Brazil. Also, Ferrari might have found a solution to Haas's problem. There was a discussion before this weekend actually that Haas and Ferrari have similar problems with their rear suspension setup, in the sense that the Haas is just terrible in the race, right? It qualifies quite well, but in the race its tyre deg is the worst on the grid by far. It just cooks its rear tyres, and Hülkenberg and Magnussen just drop like a stone through the field every weekend in race pace. They have to pit like 2 or 3 times a race because their tyres just disappear. And that also reminds you potentially of some issues that Ferrari have had, and apparently Haas have to go with more downforce to try and keep the rear tyres alive, and it sounds like potentially they could take some lessons there from the way Ferrari are now managing this, because possibly a similar issue between the two cars, because we know the two cars are pretty similar. They share a lot of concepts, they share a lot of design parts, as much as Haas can possibly buy from Ferrari they do. So how close are these other competitors to Red Bull? Aimers talk about this and they say that Red Bull and Aston Martin are actually, the gap is much closer since the update, and according to Mercedes engineers, Verstappen didn't hide much pace. Now we don't exactly know what's going on with engine mode, but then we also know that Red Bull is pretty much the fastest car in a straight line, so their engine can't be massively detuned here, if it is at all, and Verstappen likes to drive fast. I mean, this guy can't help himself, right? He's usually always on the limit, he's always going to bang in a fastest lap attempt at some point, and you're going to get an idea of what the true pace is. Now yes, he was probably managing a bit, as you would if you were 10 seconds clear at the front of the field, but still, Mercedes engineers, they look at the telemetry, they look at the GPS data and all this stuff, and they think, well, Verstappen hasn't got much more in hand. Maybe a 10th possibly, but still, the gap is closer than it was before. And also, as we discussed yesterday, Aston Martin are confident they didn't get the full effect of their upgrade in Canada. The internal data before Canada was even better than what they got from the package, which probably implies they can do kind of what Ferrari did it and get even more out of their upgrade come Austria and Silverstone, which is really exciting for how competitive they could potentially be. The car is also a bit more efficient, which kind of means better in a straight line. The working window of the car is bigger now. They struggled with this at Barcelona because they had to run at a higher ride height for the curbs and stuff. They reckon that's now fixed. So really interesting analysis there. Let's not forget McLaren are also bringing their big upgrades. Must be said, McLaren's race pace has been all over the shop, right? Sometimes they've been the worst team, sometimes they've been maybe the 5th fastest. In quali, they can be pretty competitive, right? Norris put in a great lap, of course, in Spain, but they're bringing over 3 races an upgrade package, which is going to shave a few tenths of lap times. So this is when McLaren's big upgrades are going to start arriving. We'll see if they do anything, but they've been reasonably competitive, right? They're getting into Q3 kind of regularly now, so we'll see if they can push on because, yeah, no points finishes in Canada was disappointing for them, especially when Williams got 6 points with Alex Albon. Let's talk Mercedes though, because you guys might well remember back in March when the original testing was going down, they realized the W14 wasn't what they thought it could be. He gave some pretty scathing remarks actually to his engineers that had, in his opinion, effectively listened to his thoughts and gone down a different direction route. As he said at the time, I've had so many cars like this, particularly in the McLaren days. Last year I said what the issues with the car were. It's about the team owning up and saying, we didn't listen to you. This is on the 8th of March. The full quote was as follows: last year I told them there were issues with the car. I know what a car needs. I know what a car doesn't need. It's about accountability. It's about owning up and saying, yeah, you know what, we didn't listen to you. It's not where it needs to be and we have got to work on it. So look, Hamilton doesn't design the car, but he obviously knows how a car should function. He's driven plenty of championship winning and non-championship winning cars over the years. And if Hamilton tells the engineers, hey, I think we should design the car in this direction so we can get this element of the car working well and this element of the car working well, they can then decide whether to follow that idea or not. So Hamilton, of course, spent a lot of time last season trying to develop the car in the right direction with all the extra sensors and stuff he was running at the start of the year, being a bit of a guinea pig, to be fair, with the W13 and saying to the team, all right, this is what we want to do. Now, he's not exactly saying to the guys, put the side pods back on. I think he even said recently that he wasn't really a massive fan of them going to that decision, but it was more of the characteristics of the car, where it's weak, where it's strong, where it needs to focus, and also in the terms of the chassis design, the cockpit positioning, it was a key complaint that he had, which they're starting to find ways to alleviate. The fact that he's sitting so far forward in the car relative to the rivals, this is mainly due to the design they went for with the side pod setup they had, or the zero pod setup, and the way they had to design the internal geometry of the car meant that the cockpit had to be further forward than maybe they would ideally put it, but they thought that was a reasonable trade-off. Hamilton disagreed, and now it seems like pretty much ever since March when they realised, all right, we've got to go down a different route here, a lot of the suggestions Hamilton gave, they're now exploring and are producing results, which maybe isn't a massive surprise, but I'm sure Hamilton feels pretty happy that, his original thought, maybe he feels frustrated that they didn't follow his ideas originally, but I'm sure he feels pretty, vindicated that a lot of the success that Mercedes are starting to now see again has originated from his own ideas, especially at the end of last season, and, well, on the upgrades they're now bringing to the car, and of course with his own internal performance within the car itself, because Mercedes were technically, what we saw with Ferrari, the 4th fastest team. They were technically 3rd fastest, but when you consider the one-stop of Ferrari, they were probably the 4th fastest car in race pace. Still got a podium though, and there was actually a lot of skepticism going into the weekend from Mercedes because it was a track that really exacerbated all the bad tendencies of their car. But after the checkered flag, there were plenty of smiles in the Mercedes garage. They knew it wasn't going to be a particularly good circuit, but they were happy with how it went. And then Hamilton has gone on to say that, look, he gets a more positive feeling now. I like being in the car at the moment a lot more because I can drive it in a better window. And the article mentions how his suggestion from last autumn about returning to a different chassis in a more conventional driving position was not followed. And, he also outlined further areas for improvement, which they have now been exploring. So he also goes on to say, it's really a lot about the traction zones that they seem to struggle with. The efficiency could be better in terms of straight line speed, bit more rear downforce, and mainly lack of traction, which is definitely a key issue in Canada. And also a circuit like Austria, right, as well. I mean, especially out of, turn 3. Traction there is not easy to find, and Mercedes will probably lose time in that section of the racetrack, but we know that even last year's Mercedes was almost fighting for pole there last year before Russell and Hamilton both spun out, giving it absolute maximum beans to try and get pole in Austria last year. So the W13 wasn't actually that bad there, at least in qualifying trim, and there are some corners that are more front limited than the Mercedes will probably be alright with. So So yeah, that is the main problem that they've got to concern, the lack of traction, the rear downforce, but fundamentally it's still a car with limits, and I think that's the key thing to note here, is that they know that on certain tracks, at the end of the season, they think they can compete with Red Bull, and even Toto Wolff might be very confident. We saw just yesterday that he said that they reckon they can win in Silverstone. So certain tracks, certain conditions, maybe Red Bull get unlucky, maybe Verstappen again seems to get cursed at Silverstone with all sorts of problems that have affected him over the last several years. Maybe they can find a way to challenge Verstappen, and honestly, it sounds like Verstappen wants to challenge, because this quote came out during the weekends. Now that I've won a championship, it's nice to win another one and another one, but it's basically the same thing, so it's not something that will keep me here forever. So it's kind of incredible, actually, for Verstappen to say that we know that after 2028, he's almost certainly going to want to do some other form of racing, whether it's endurance, Le Mans, anything, that he might get up to at the time. He wants to still explore those other things while he's in prime Verstappen territory. But for him to say that he could keep winning championship after championship and it just gets too boring that he wants to dip out, is kind of incredible. And he's mentioned plenty of times in just the past few weeks how, he's hoping that the other guys catch him up at some point. He's hoping that there's some sort of challenge here. But fundamentally, it's difficult to see for the next few races. And actually, this is a little bit concerning. I thought a remarkable stat here from F1 Stats Guru. The last 11 races that have been run on clockwise circuits, Verstappen's won all of them. Going back to France last year, a lot of circuits are clockwise, right? I think most are kind of formatted in this way, but certainly not all. But the next 6 races in the Canada also are on clockwise circuits. Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, Belgium, and then Zandvoort and Monza, of course, all go clockwise around the track, and Verstappen seems to be absolutely killing it there. So maybe for the next few races, Verstappen's going to keep winning everything. He might even try and challenge, if this continues, Vettel's record for most wins in a row, but at some point you've got to think that the other teams catch up enough, and luck falls in such a way that either the Mercedes, the Aston, or maybe even the Ferrari can actually snatch a victory sometime soon. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.